The first reason you shouldn't do a PhD is if you are using it to avoid something. I see this all the time in younger PhD students when they just don't want to look at their life, plan for the future, and they're like,
I'll just do this because it's the next logical thing.
This is avoidance. They're avoiding looking at the job market. They're avoiding kind of deciding what they want to do in the future, and that is a huge red flag for doing a PhD. I call it the path of least resistance. That is where someone gets to the end of their undergraduate and they're like,
I don't know what to do. I'll just continue this path.
Without really thinking about where that path leads. That path is very, very good at getting you to a certain point in the future. But if you don't want to be at that point in the future, then you need to think about why you're doing a PhD and what it will provide to your life. This path of least resistance can also be encouraged by academic supervisors. They're like,
oh yeah, come into my lab, do my research for me, help me make my career better.
They're not going to often dissuade you from doing a PhD. Quite often you'll see researchers go like,
oh, you are very clever, you're completely capable of doing a PhD, come into my lab.
And that is where a lot of issues start. People start thinking,
oh, maybe I should do a PhD because this person is saying I should do it.
Rather than looking at it from their perspective and going, well, they need people in their lab doing research, otherwise their career doesn't progress. So you need to think about it in terms of avoidance. If you're using it to avoid making a decision about your life or avoiding the workplace or entering a new sort of stage of your life, then you need to consider whether or not this PhD is the right choice. Depending on the group of friends you have, quite often it feels like you should do one because everyone else is doing one. That is probably one of the worst reasons to do a PhD. When I was doing my undergraduate, my master's even, I was kind of like around people that were more than capable of doing a PhD. But just because it's the right decision for them doesn't mean it's the right decision for you or me or anyone else. In fact, I think I was part of the problem. One of the people I did my master's with, they went into industry, and I'll be honest with you, I kind of looked down on that decision, being like,
oh, why wouldn't you do a PhD? Why wouldn't you go further? Clearly, you're not capable of it.
They are more than capable of it. They made the right decision for them. They entered industry to do research. They're successful, they're happy, they're rich, which is something that PhD students don't become. And I think that in hindsight, I was part of the problem. So just because all of your friendship group that you've built up during your undergraduate is doing a PhD doesn't mean you have to do one. In fact, if all of your friends are doing a PhD, you should really consider doing it twice because you may just be swept up in their enthusiasm and you don't have your own sort of passion for it. Alright, when I see this really upsets me, and that is people doing PhDs that can't afford it. They are doing a self-funded PhD, and I'll be honest with you, no one should ever in the world of PhDs do a self-funded PhD. That is because it is not an investment. It is not an investment for the future because it is a diminishing returns. The fact you've got a PhD doesn't automatically mean you're going to get a better, higher paying job. In a lot of instances, you're better off just with a master's. So if you're paying for a PhD and it's not like your number one passion in life, then you should really consider whether or not doing a PhD is for you. Wait until you get a funded PhD. Wait until you get a scholarship. Do not go into debt for a PhD because your earning potential isn't necessarily going to be so much higher afterwards. Now, you need to think about this in terms of your quality of life. Like, even though you're a student, you're doing a PhD, there's no point having this financial pressure and strain on you all the time because you'll just be thinking, why on earth did I do this? Not only is it about the financial cost, but it's about the opportunity cost because you could have spent the time that you did your PhD in a job, working your way up the career ladder, earning skills that actually people value and pay you money for. So if you can't afford to do a PhD, please don't get yourself into debt to do one. Please don't do self-funded unless you are very, very rich and your mum and dad are like, here's loads of money. get a scholarship, make sure the university is paying for you to be there, because ultimately you're providing value to them as well. I mean, I say never, but it really is for most people. Don't get yourself into debt or do a self-funded PhD. One of the worst decisions you can make. If you're the sort of person that needs structure, a PhD may not be for you. Now, when you're doing like a medical degree, when you're doing a law degree, when you're doing an engineering degree, any degree, the university has laid out a structure for you, which is like,
this is what you do first in your first year, then you jump through the hoops, pass the exams, do the coursework, and then you go on to the second thing. The second year, we do these things.
and I loved that structure because it's like you just plow on through, someone's going here next, and you go,
Oh, thank you very much.
but a PhD is not like that and is very supervisor dependent. Ultimately, they sit you down and they say,
We need to achieve this thing.
and you go,
Oh, yes.
and how it happens really largely is up to you. You may have a micromanager PhD supervisor that actually does provide the steps. That comes with its own problems. But if you need that structure, if you want that structure, if you are not comfortable with uncertainty, then a PhD is not for you. It is a massive risk that you are taking on in your life. And a lot of people actually start a PhD and then realize, oh, this isn't anything like undergrad. Undergrad, it was all like laid out for me and I was able to do all of these fun things. Whereas in fact, a PhD is a choose your own adventure. You need to sort of like come up against a problem, work your way around it, come up against another problem, work your way around it, take 7 step backs, take 7 steps back, reanalyze, go around again. Like that is the process of a PhD. It is not linear, and if it is linear, there's something seriously wrong and you should sort of like ask yourself,
What is wrong? Why is my PhD linear?
it is turbulent, it's up and down, it's not straightforward. All of these things, if you need that in your life and it really stresses you out not to have that structure, then a PhD probably isn't for you, and it's only going to sort of like make whatever mental health issues you have worse. Yes. Don't do it if you want certainty and structure, because it is anything but that. Okay, this one's going to get a little bit deep. But I feel like a load of people do PhDs because they feel like it's going to solve some sort of deep personal insecurity that they have. And I think I was in that bucket as well. And that's because when I was younger in my A-levels, I really didn't do as well as I had hoped, despite what all of my teachers were saying I should be able to achieve. So then I went into university with this like chip on my shoulder, being like, oh, you're clever. You have to prove yourself. And I just sort of like followed that line of inquiry in my mind, being like, I need to prove myself. I need to prove myself. And doing a PhD was something that I think I was hoping would solve that personal insecurity of not being clever enough. And that, I think, is a terrible reason to do a PhD. I think then you get to the end of a PhD and you realize that the big gaping hole, the insecure hole, isn't filled by the PhD. In fact, I think it makes it a little bit worse because you get out the other end and you're like,
I'm meant to be an expert. I don't feel like an expert. What does expertise feel like when it's inside you?
and it doesn't feel very different from just knowing a fact or knowing some things, to be honest. So yeah, it is a terrible reason. If you're doing a PhD because you're hoping it will solve some sort of personal insecurity or something you've been holding on to for the whole of your life, or even kind of an identity thing where you're like,
I am the clever one. I should be able to do a PhD. I was the cleverest in my school. I was the cleverest in my friendship group. Or someone told me once that I should achieve something and I didn't achieve it. Now I have to prove myself.
it's just a terrible reason to be doing PhDs. So yeah, let me know which one of those you resonate with. If you like this video, go check out this one where I talk about grad school for newbies and what they don't tell you. Go check it out.